All right, so hopefully everybody can see. And if there's an issue, just put it on the chat. If everything looks good, give me a thumbs up. I see you guys. Thumbs up. All right, good. Thank you, everybody. All right, let's kick it off then. So this actually is a session I debuted just a few weeks ago. If you guys see here, it says SQL Saturday 1064. I was in Toronto, and I was really surprised. People are really interested. They're starting to get really passionate about this kind of stuff. So yeah, implementing generative AI models with Azure OpenAI, and yeah, really exciting stuff. As part of the group, we do have more sessions coming up. I think in next week we have one about managing um, Azure with Terraform. We have another one, very interesting one that a gentleman is doing in December to close out the year for using ML to tackle climate change. Then I already have one scheduled. We have the group kicking off again in January with some Fabric stuff. I have another one coming up in February. It's again Fabric. Fabric is really hot right now in the Microsoft space, so we will be having that as well. And then I'm also probably going to jump in back because I've gotten some interesting people that want to dive a little bit deeper into what would be the architecture of an actual production Gen AI application, right? So far there's a lot of prototyping, a lot of like people just playing around with it, kicking the tires, but just like any other application, right? What about, cost? What about high availability? What about disaster recovery? So I'm putting together a session for that. So we'll probably do that one around, maybe I'm thinking early March or so. I'll put myself into the schedule again. All right, so thanks for joining me. I'm the organizer of the group, and today I'm also presenting and moderating. I'm doing everything today, but I appreciate the time. You guys are taking time off your day to come in and learn with me, so I definitely appreciate that. I've been a consultant now for quite a while, almost more than 10 years. But previously, I was working as a database administrator. I worked for Hewlett Packard for a few years in my home country of Costa Rica. I live now in Ontario, in Canada. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. Check out my blog. If you come up with any questions, feel free to reach out to me as well. Warner at createdatapros.com. My employer, Pythian.com, also has a really nice technical blog where we post a lot of technical material that goes beyond just the Microsoft stack. We talk a lot about other cloud providers. We talk about data science, data governance, and anything related to data really. Also, feel free to also just look me up by name on LinkedIn and connect. I love to connect with all my learners as well. All right, so first, let's just set the stage for Gen AI and really about Gen AI in what we think about in the Azure ecosystem, right? So, and first of all, Gen AI is AI that creates new content, right? So it can create text, it can create images, it can create audio, it can create video. Most people have interacted with Gen AI at this point and they have seen it in action, right? You have played around with either ChatGPT or now Bing Chat is integrated with Edge or Google Bard as well, which is Google's competitor to ChatGPT, uses another model behind the scenes, or even image generators. If any here have played around with some of these AI image generators, they're really mind blowing nowadays. Like some of the images that they generate, the photorealism, like it would be really hard to guess that it's not a real photography, right? So Midjourney, for example, is one of the most popular ones. OpenAI happens to also have a model for it called Dall-e. We can play around with Dall-e in a little bit in the session. But yeah, so you ask something to the model, right? It generates some text here. For example, I asked, what's the story of Pythian? Pythian being the company that I work for, but the ChatGPT grabs the general historical definition of Pythian, which is that there was in the ancient Greek mythology something called the Pythian Games, organized by the Oracle of Delphi, right? It's somebody that claim to communicate with the gods and so on, right? So this is kind of like the stuff that you can interact as a back and forth with the chat agent, right? And it's not really just about chat though. That's the interesting thing, right? This is what most of us think about it when we think about Gen AI is our interactions with ChatGPT, but really it goes beyond that, right? And this is where it's important to separate the needs of a consumer, somebody like us, just talking to ChatGPT, right? Oh, I want to help me create a packing list for a fishing trip, help me plan a party, help me create a blog post, about summer recipes, help me, put a name to a song. I want to write a novel, help me get going, kind of thing, as opposed to the needs of the enterprise. And this is where the Azure part comes in. This is why has Microsoft partnered with OpenAI? Why has OpenAI partnered back with Microsoft as well? And OpenAI does offer enterprise accounts, but I'll go into some detail there as to why still Azure makes a difference. But at the general level, enterprises are not going to be asking ChatGPT for packing lists for camping trips, right? So, what does the enterprise care about in terms of Gen AI? A data analyst, for example, or any business knowledge worker, can they search, summarize, for example, market reports while not, you know, exfiltrating our data out to their laptops and upload into a chat agent on the internet? Can customer service reps be more accurate, or can our automated chatbots be more human like? Can we also have access to state of the art models, right? Because these models, a lot of them are closed source, like OpenAI's models. There's some open source ones as well, like Llama from Meta. But how do I get access to these, right? What are the best ones? Can my customers understand my financial products better, for example, while at the same time being safe, explainable, right? Like if I want to integrate like a new kind of like intelligent search or intelligent chat to my products to interface with my customers. Can we generate content in general? If I want to use it for generating tweets, I want to use AI for generating articles, I want to use AI for generating images, but I also want to make sure that we don't end up spending more money on AI than we would have spent on just the person, right? And is it easy to integrate? Again, this is another one of the key pieces where it's important to differentiate with Azure, right? So this is where the Azure OpenAI piece comes in. I only have a few slides and then we're going to jump in the demos, right? So why Azure, right? So like I said, these are the needs of the enterprise, right? About controlling the data, about being accurate, about having state-of-the-art models, about having these different cost controls and so on, right? And this is what Azure really provides, is the ability to govern what you're doing with the AI models, right? So if you need to control the data, well, you can deploy the model in a specific region, right? You don't have to just send it to the global API that OpenAI has, right? For example, if you have data sovereignty requirements, you can deploy the OpenAI GPT model in a specific region, and your data, let's say, might be in Azure Blob Storage, it just stays within that region and so on, right? You have access to the state of the art models, again, hosted inside Azure. You can control costs by, integrating your Gen AI consumption with your other Azure FinOps components, right? And your Azure billing and so on. And is it easy to integrate? Once again, it is an Azure service. It offers an API. Microsoft is creating SDKs. Microsoft is creating integrations with other Azure services and so on, right? There's a bunch of different models. Right now we have the type of model, GPT-4, right? Is the OpenAI did announce GPT-4 Turbo. There will be things coming as well. I expect this is going to keep getting updated over time. Um, GPT-4, of course, is famous because it also has capabilities with vision, not just with text. Purely text. Also, we have GPT 3.5. GPT 3.5 is pretty good if you only have a simple use case. Let's say you just want to do like a chatbot or some documentation or something like that. 3.5 is pretty good. There's an embedding model. So this is the model that can read a document and create a vector, and we'll look at that in the demo. And there's the image model that OpenAI has that's called Dall-e, and there's also an audio to text model, so a transcriber model that is called Whisper. So all these models are available right now in the Azure OpenAI service. This week in particular, there will be more announcements related to this stuff. So let's look, for example, let's say you want to build basically a ChatGPT clone inside Azure, right? So we would have here, Microsoft Entra, by the way, is the new name for Azure Active Directory. For those people that are not familiar with it, this is the fancy new icon. They gave it a new name, but it is Azure Active Directory, basically. You would have, let's say, the chat web interface on an Azure app service. The different chat histories will be saved on Cosmos DB. It would do send a prompt and get the response back from the Azure OpenAI service. It could also be augmented with documents, right? If you see here, it says top paragraph. So we're using cognitive search and Azure AI document intelligence. So the user, and again, we'll see this in the demo, but just to give an idea of, again, the integrations that we can build by having it hosted in Azure, the user would interact with the chat and then upload a document. The document would get analyzed with the Azure AI Document Intelligence, which would split the document into different paragraphs. Then it would index those paragraphs with the cognitive search, and then it sends those top paragraphs as context to the LLM model for the LLM model to respond back to us, right? So that's pretty much the solution that we're going to look at, and we're going to look at the different pieces behind the scenes and a little bit of the code as well. And the solution is provided, by the way, very nice, is provided open on GitHub by Microsoft. I didn't write it. Microsoft wrote it and just made it available to the community for anybody to play around with it. I've been playing around with it and to, present on it or do whatever you want. If you want to use it for your own playing around, tinkering, modifying it, it's there for everybody to take advantage of. All right. So that's the demo where the actual code is. So it's in Microsoft's GitHub. It's called Azure Chat. Um, just the URL right there, and that's the one that I'm going to be showing you today. Oh, that's it. So let's jump into the demo and start right here. I'm going to do a quick check here. Let's see if we got anything on the chat so far. Can I get the link to the YouTube? Yes. So the link to the YouTube is on the meetup page. And if not, I'll post it. I'll link it later on in the chat as well. All right. So let's keep going then to the demo part here. So let me open the browser. Hopefully everybody can see the browser experience here. So this is the application, the clone of ChatGPT that Microsoft has provided. If you guys see here, I have the repo open. It's once again, this is in the official Microsoft repo. It's called Azure Chat, and it's got the whole source. They're working actively on it. So it is MIT license. You can do whatever you want with it. It's really nice. So it's well documented. It has the different deployment options and steps you got to run through to get it running in your own Azure tenant. I did it already. So this is what it looks like. It's a couple of interesting things, right? You can choose a conversation style. So you can say be creative, be balanced, be precise. Behind the scenes, what that does is there's a parameter. If you've played around with the OpenAI API, you would know this. But in case you haven't, there's a parameter internally when you do API calls that's called a temperature. And the lower the temperature it is, let's say the less creative the AI is, and the more likely it is to give you more straightforward answers and more repeatable answers. If you're asking it to be more creative, then you increase the temperature and it's more likely to create more variations of answers and to be more creative, which means to deviate a little bit from the prompt a little bit more, right? And then you can see here, right, how would we like to chat, whether it's just a general chat or with a file. If we just try out here and just say, that hopefully this is all up and running today, the demo gods don't get mad at me, but we can try. Hello, GPT. Um, Give me an idea for an EAI presentation. Just a quick abstract. I don't know, let's see what it says. Okay, certainly, blah, blah, blah. Let's see what it came up with. Here's a quick abstract. AI in everyday life, enhancing efficiency and empowering innovation. And he even gave me the little abstract. Maybe I'll turn this into a real session. We'll see, right? But all that to say, right, this also something, I don't know if you guys noticed how fast the inference was, right? I read this about this online and I forget who it was. I didn't save the link. I should have saved the link, but I didn't. But somebody, maybe if we search online, I'll be able to find it. But somebody did a test, and they had like they charted the response times of running inference. Inference is when we interact with the AI, right? And the AI sends us back a result. And they charted the time that it takes to do inference between OpenAI's enterprise API and Azure's hosted OpenAI models. And Azure was like 3 or 4 times faster than OpenAI's enterprise API. So that's another reason. I don't think Microsoft, obviously being a partner with OpenAI, they can't openly go out and say, hey, actually, our hosted OpenAI models run way faster than OpenAI's models, right? But in practice, this is what I've seen, is that they do run faster. And I'm not the only one. Like somebody online had mentioned that same thing before, right? Again, let's just see. Okay, well, that was our GPT chat idea. Let's do, for example, we're going to do a file. And then here I have a file I want to load into GPT. So this is an incident report from a SQL Server incident that I grabbed from my past life um, as a DVA. So I can go ahead here and upload it. And then it'll take just a minute here. So you see it was uploaded. And behind the scenes, this is following that architecture that I showed before, right? So it is going to split the document in paragraphs and then index it. And we can interact with the document basically, right? So I can say, hey, GPT, give me a 1 paragraph summary of this incident report. We'll see what it says. All right, so it says, based on the incident report, there was a blocking and slowness issue on the RIM AG last week, right, the SQL Server Availability Group. The issue caused end users to experience slowness, impacted the Tivoli backup system, potentially breaking the RTO and the RPO. Root cause of the issue was identified, right? The report provides some recommendations, such as reviewing in maintenance jobs, switching off Tivoli backups, reaching out to Tivoli support. And I can just, that's nice. It gave me a summary of the whole incident report. And again, we can leverage both the specific knowledge about the incident report and the general knowledge that GPT has, right? So you could say, okay, thanks GPT. It's always nice to be polite to the AI agent. Thanks GPT. Can you give me 3 more recommendations to prevent this type of incident from happening again, for example, right? And then we get some recommendations here, right? Oh, well, we should have some regular performance monitoring and tuning to make sure that we don't have performance issues, so the AG is always working. There's an issue with the Tivoli backup here, so we should review our backup and recovery strategy to make sure that it doesn't do this again. Make sure that we have training sessions so our team members know what to do when they see these problems, right? All this other stuff. And this is actually one of the main, I think is going to be one of the main um, use cases that we're going to see emerging from Gen AI is a lot of like call center interaction or tech support interaction. A lot of it can really be augmented and made way more efficient, way more powerful with Gen AI, in my opinion. And then and keep in mind, I'm just interacting right now. I think behind the scenes, I'm interacting with a GPT 3.5. I want to say. I'm not sure. I have to check, but we can check. We'll check in a minute. But you could even do more than this, right? If you had like specific run books, you could upload them to your cognitive search, and then GPT would have also the information from your run books. You could upload up-to-date documentation from, let's say, the latest version of SQL Server so that it knows the latest best practices that Microsoft recommends and all this kind of stuff, right? So all that is available really if you want to augment the way that these solutions are working. Now, I'm going to show you what all this looks like behind the scenes on the Azure space and kind of like how this works. So this is what the Azure OpenAI service OpenAI Studio looks like today. Microsoft is actively working on some of this stuff. So, since I started playing around with it, things have shifted. They have looked a little bit different. They are definitely, investing a lot of money on R&D in terms of the experience for the AI services and the OpenAI service. So, by the time you guys may play around with it in like a week or 2 weeks, it might have shifted again a little bit. It might look a little bit different, just to let you know. But the main concepts are here. So first is the playground. So we have a chat playground. The idea of the chat playground is that. Oh, I don't have a deployment here. Let me see. Oh, maybe I'm not in the right OpenAI studio here. OpenAI. Mhm. Let's see. OpenAI Studio. Because I should have some deployments, obviously, since we just ran the chat. There. Okay, so it was 3.5. Yeah, you see, it was 3.5 turbo in that um, application. So the playground, the idea of the playground is that we interact with the model, and then it allows us to play around with it and see um, how it behaves, right? And some of the parameters here, like I mentioned before, for example, you can see the temperature here. You can tweak it, and then depending on your use case, you can play around with those parameters, and then either set them higher or set them lower, and get the agent tuned to what you want it to do. Um, and and then based on those parameters, then you can take those parameters into, let's say, your production scenario, right? Let's say, for example, here as well, you can change the system message for the agent, right? So if you're not familiar with this, when you interact with one of the OpenAI models, there is what is known as the system prompt. So the system prompt is kind of like sets the stage for the model. If you see here right now, it has a very generic one. It says you are an AI assistant that helps people find information, right? So it's a very, very generic description of what the model actually does. And you can just, just talk to it. Oh, I can speak now my input. That's interesting. I don't really want to do that. But and then this is the same thing, right? So it's a very it's all interactive. So I can say, hey GPT, and this is hooked up behind the scenes to that deployment that I did of ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo, for example. Say GPT, write me a haiku about winter in Canada. Oh, so snowflakes gently fall, Canada's winter embrace, frosty beauty thrives, right? Whatever. Depending on your use case, then you might be happy about this. You might think, oh, no, I don't like it. You can increase the temperature, you can decrease the temperature, you can make the responses bigger or smaller. There's some more advanced parameters here. Like if you see here, it says frequency penalty. So it says it decreases the likelihood of repeating the same text in a response. So, you know, most of the times, honestly, I haven't really touched any of these other than playing around with the temperature to get it to be either more creative or less creative, or more deterministic or less deterministic. You can see the raw JSON response. So this is where we see how these messages get structured behind the scenes to interact with the LLM, right? So if you see here, this little interaction about the winter haiku, what gets sent to the API is this. It says, okay, system, this is the system prompt. You're an AI assistant, helps people find information. Okay, the user is telling you this now. Hey, GPT, write me a haiku about winter in Canada. And then, we got this other assistant now responded with this. The content of the assistant is now gently swell, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and now, for example, if I go back, let's move the JSON view, and I say, oh, beautiful, beautiful, give me one about summer in Mexico. Okay, so now it's a haiku about summer in Mexico, right? Sun kisses the sand, Mexico summer unfolds, warmth and joy abound. Now, keep in mind something very interesting that people just take it for granted. They don't really think about it twice. Is I said, beautiful, give me one about summer in Mexico. I didn't say give me one what, right? You guys notice that? I said I wanted a haiku in the first interaction, and then I said, give me one about somewhere in Mexico, but I didn't say one of what. But in natural language, obviously, when we are talking back and forth with people, that's how we talk, right? There's a bunch of things that we don't repeat because it's the context of the whole conversation gives them meaning. When we're interacting with these GPT models, and this is very important for developers, especially to understand this, that the model doesn't have memory of our conversation. What is happening behind the scenes is that every time that we talk, the whole conversation is getting passed in to the model so that the model can take the whole conversation as the context to give me the new answer, right? So if you see now, the raw JSON of the interaction has been augmented because now we have the message where the user, the role of the user, said, beautiful, give me one about somewhere in Mexico. And now the assistant answered with this, right? So the way that the model was able to say, oh, when he says give me one, it means give me one haiku, is because the whole conversation is fed into the model every single time. And this is where it's really important to understand what is known as the tokens. You see here where it says input tokens, we got um, message history is 56, system message 11. So we've used this particular model has a max token input of 4,000, and we've used 67 in this particular conversation. So far, we're using 67 tokens out of the 4,000 limit. So that's something to understand, and why it's so important is because, like I said, the model doesn't have a memory. The way that the model exhibits a behavior where it looks like it's remembering things is because we are feeding it the previous sections of the conversation so that it knows what we're talking about. And that's where it's really important to keep in mind what the token count is. Also, something very important to keep in mind on token count is because you are charged by the amount of tokens that you process. And you also have quotas on the amounts of tokens that you process. So I haven't touched there yet on some of these things here. I will in a minute, but that's why it's so important. And you will hear this all along when people talk about these models. They'll talk about either they're talking about GPT models or they're talking about Google's Palm model or Anthropic's Claude model. Anthropic, by the way, AWS and Google both invested billions of dollars in Anthropic. Anthropic is basically OpenAI's main competitor right now, and their flagship model is called Claude, and Claude is the main GPT competitor right now in the closed space, right? In the open source space, the big, pretty much the only player right now is Meta with the Llama model. But all that to say is that the cost is per tokens, right? So the longer the conversations are, the more context you have to feed into the model. And that's where you'll hear that, let's say GPT 3.5 Turbo supports 4K. There's, if you see here, if I go back to deployments, um, you see I have the capacity of this particular model is 30,000 tokens per minute, right? And for example, if you look at this embedding model, it's 10,000 tokens per minute. So there's a bunch of different things in terms of capacity that you have to keep in mind when you're deploying the models. These limits, by the way, I think these are set by Azure for guaranteeing quality of service. But if you're a big Azure consumer, you can probably call Microsoft support and say, hey, I'm going to be spending, a couple of $100,000 a month on OpenAI inference. I want a higher rate limit. They'll probably increase it for you. All right. So I'm going to stop there just for a sec. Let me check back on the. Please show the incident report that was fed in. Yeah, sure. Let me find it over here. Let's put it in here. So this is the incident report that was summarized. So it's a PDF. It's a pretty, it's a PDF. It's got a bunch of tables and stuff. It's got all these different sections and whatever. All this, it's just handled by the document intelligence tokenizer paragraph splitting thing. So if you remember from the diagram, let me go in back here. there's this component here, the Azure AI Document Intelligence. So the Azure AI Document Intelligence, maybe I can show it real quick. That's a really good question. Let me show you guys. Here's Document Intelligence. Document Intelligence also has its own playground, by the way. I'll just show it right now so you guys can see. It's pretty cool. All right. So let me open this Document Intelligence Studio. So this document intelligence service is the one that can read different document types and can split them into the different components. So if you see here, right, um, it can extract paragraphs, it can extract tables from the documents, checkboxes, text that is in like embedded forms and stuff like that. And you can actually go ahead and like load it up. Here, this is just a sample. So it comes with a sample. And here, I'll just show you guys what it does. See, so right, it analyzed this like PDF of like a newspaper cover, right? And then it says, okay, so first we got this paragraph here. Okay, we got a title here. We got the next paragraph. We got what looks like a section heading. We got another paragraph here, right? So it tries to kind of understand also the semantic of the model. Sorry, of the document that it's reading. So it can say, oh, well, this was a section heading here, paragraph here, and it gives you obviously it gives you this as a structured output in JSON that you can then use for developing your own thing. Now, the nice thing about the Azure um, integration or the work with the OpenAI models is that this is already provided in the sample code how they do this with the OpenAI document intelligence. So pretty cool. But that also means if you have an advanced use case, you can play around with all this, right? You can make your own custom document intelligence parser. Like I could have made I didn't, but you could make a more fine-tuned model to the incident reports that extracts more information from the incident reports more than just grabbing the paragraphs, which is what it does today, right? So that's kind of like what it is. All right, let me see
Hey,
if we got another thing. Yeah, somebody wants to say.
yeah. So Warner, thanks for clarifying that file content. So basically, you will be able to tap to an intelligence where basically feed in the intelligence for the Chat GPT to process, right?
Hmm.
So one way is uploading a file. So think about the organization. So they will have some internal processing data. It may be of different area. So they may not interested to publish to a public domain, right? If you go to OpenAI, uh, it has to be in a restricted way, but at the same time, they want to use the OpenAI capability, right? So how
Hmm.
do we handle that?
Well, that's the piece where the Azure OpenAI service really shines, right? So this that I'm showing here, and
Mhm.
again, this is just an example interface, right? You would obviously make it your own. Maybe it wouldn't even be a web chat. Maybe it would be an API that you're creating or something like that, right? And this is all hosted inside Azure, inside its own resource group. And you can see here, it's all located in East US, right? So I could have everything here that you're seeing is hosted in East US, the Cosmos DB, and I'll show the internals of this again in a little bit. I just wanted to show the document intelligence too, but that's also East US. The search service is also in East US. This is all part of the same subscription, right? So there is no movement of data. Keep that in mind too. Like when I'm feeding these document, like again, I'm uploading a document here just to show the demo, right? But to your example, you maybe have your knowledge base in an Azure Blob Storage account, right? So you really wouldn't be uploading them through a web interface anyway. What you would be doing is you would be building a cognitive search index from the Azure Blob Storage contents, and then using that cognitive search index as your retrieval engine for the chat model, right? So if you look at the diagram here, right? So here we have Azure Cognitive Search, and instead of us uploading a file, right, through a web interface, we would have another icon here that would be Azure Blob Storage, and then from Azure Blob Storage, we would feed the cognitive search. And you could even have a job, because when you have cognitive search, you can say how often you refresh. So let's say, you think maybe people will create new documents or something like that every week. You want to have the chat have the latest context. So you could say, okay, cognitive search every week, I want you to rebuild your index, right? And then you know that the next week, then the chat now will have the latest um, context to work with, right? And all of this is happening inside the Azure, like let's call it the walled garden of Azure, right? It's not going out to another party. To your point, Jay, you mentioned, I think, what if we use the OpenAI enterprise? The same thing, right? So OpenAI offers an enterprise thing, but you have to then take on the legal terms of OpenAI. A lot of companies already have enterprise agreements with Microsoft. It means also that the company's legal has reviewed all the stuff and controls that Microsoft has, and they feel more comfortable with the controls that Microsoft has and knowing that it stays within the Microsoft region and it even stays within the Microsoft data center, right? And doesn't go out to another third party. So I think really that's where the governance enterprise value of OpenAI comes in. Obviously, there's a lot of value in all the integration and all that kind of stuff, but from a legal governance perspective, I think that's where the value is, right? You keep everything in Azure and you can keep everything confined to one or a few Azure regions that you trust, right? Make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah. Thanks, Warner. Perfect.
All right, cool. So let me just show you guys a little bit more of the internals here of the solution. So we talked about the document intelligence and show you the doc and kind of like this is like the graphical explanation of what it's doing behind the scenes. Um, but there's more than that, right? So if you see here, the chat remembers, but the chats that we've created that we kind of like interacted with, that in the architecture is being stored in Cosmos DB. So if I go here, I have a Cosmos DB already open. Let me refresh this. And you see here, I have a bunch of different Cosmos DB um, documents, right? So it says, hello, GPT, give me an idea for an AI presentation, right? Just a quick abstract. And then certainly, here's a quick abstract. So this application, this web application that Microsoft created as, like I said, a sample, is keeping the history of the conversations in Cosmos DB, right? So that way, if I get out of the application and I were to log back in, it wouldn't just start again from zero because, as I mentioned before, the models themselves don't have memory. To the model, every time you interact with the model, it's like starting again from scratch. Now, OpenAI announced in their dev day, November 6th, that was 9 days ago, they announced a new API that OpenAI is making public called the Assistance API. In the Assistance API, this is already handled for you. So when you interact with the Assistance API, the Assistance API gives you a big, like long string identifier for your conversation called the thread ID. And then the thread ID is used to once again go back to the Assistance API and say, hey, Assistant API, let's restart this conversation for thread ID X, Y, Z, whatever, right? And this is handled for you. But basically behind the scenes, OpenAI is doing this approach that we're seeing right now with this particular application, right? They have their own database, they're storing the chat message history and all this stuff, but the model itself does not have memory, right? Everything is dependent on the context that you feed to the model. And if I go here, you'll see it's a very similar idea with this implementation that Microsoft has done with Cosmos DB. You can see here on the screen actually that there is a thread ID as well. And if I go back, see here where it says, give me an idea for an AI presentation, the thread ID is the same between these two messages, right? Because they are different messages that are part of the same thread ID. And the system just has to use the timestamps to rebuild the whole conversation, put it into context, and then feed it into the LLM, right? So that's how it works behind the scenes. And on the search document side, just to show you how this works, right? So this is what it looks like on the cognitive search index. So cognitive search index, what it does is that it takes a document, it will split it into paragraphs. So you can see here, for example, the content that is indexed in this vector is just one of the paragraphs, right? The business impact paragraph is here. This is just a random record that I pulled out. And the embedding model, so that's the model that reads a text and creates a vector from it. I think the vector has, I believe, is 1536 different dimensions. So you see here, there's an array that has 1536 different numbers. And then using the cognitive search, basically when we ask something, then cognitive search will take our interaction with the model and use it as the search query. It'll come back with chunks of the documents and say, we think this is kind of relevant. Now I'm going to give it to you, gives it to the LLM, and the LLM comes up with a natural sounding response, right? This is a natural sounding response. It doesn't just give me the chunks of the documents. It actually puts it together in a nice sounding explanation, like this summary that we read earlier today. How that is done, actually, this is the nice thing about this solution that's on the GitHub, that's open. We can actually look into it. So this is how we process the file. Here's how it does this bit. Um, so if you see here, behind the scenes, this chat application here, what it's doing, you'll see the system prompt. Once again, it just says you are an AI who's a helpful AI assistant. And then look what it tells the AI to do behind the scenes, right? It says, okay, given the following extracted parts of a long document, create a final answer. If you don't know the answer, just say that you don't know. Don't try to make up an answer. That might sound funny, but hallucination is a big problem in the realm of LLMs. If you go look online, there's a big problem that is still not 100% solved. However, I was looking yesterday on Twitter, and somebody actually developed a hallucination leaderboard. So what they have is the less amount of hallucination your model does, then the top of the leaderboard you'll be. So at the top of the leaderboard right now is GPT-4. So GPT-4 is the one that hallucinates the less. So every time that the model doesn't know something, sometimes it will just create it. And this is especially, it took a lot of people by surprise, especially with the days of GPT-3 when it just came out back in, like, if you guys remember, like January. People were starting to use it for references, right? It would say, oh, GPT, give me 3 references of who came up first with the idea of using, I don't know, Python for ML projects, whatever. And then GPT would come out with the references. And then when you cross-check the references, turned out that the articles didn't exist, right? It was actually making them up. So that's also why people do a little bit of prompt engineering to just basically tell the model is, if you don't know, don't make it up. It's okay to say that you don't know. Then you see here, always include a citation. Don't use the format for your citation. And then you see here where it says, okay, so I give you I give you these instructions. Now here's the context. And then it comes the context, and then it puts the chat thing. So if we go back to this interaction I just had, and again, I think somebody put in there for the RAG. Yeah, this is called RAG. This is the term that people are using. It's retrieval augmented generation. So if we look at this interaction, basically, so you'll see it's saying, um, okay, given the following extracted parts of a long document, create a final answer, blah, blah, blah. Then it says, here's the context. In the context, it will feed it back the chunks, so the paragraphs on the cognitive search based on what we said. And then it says, okay, and now here's the question from the user. And the question was, hey, GPT, give me a 1 paragraph summary of this incident report, right? And that's where, then GPT came back with this particular answer. So that's kind of like how it works. So it's really interesting to see behind the scenes again how this whole thing is composed to be able to just give us an answer. If you want to go through the document, sorry, through the repo, also the repo shows the steps here that are being used for when you load the file. So it loads the file. You can see it analyzes the document. You can see what it does. So it grabs all the paragraphs out of these the document analysis, and then for each one of the paragraphs, it stores it into the cognitive search and so on. And then you see here where it indexes the document. So this is where it interacts with cognitive search. and so on. And then, once it's actually talking to it, you can see here where it does the retrieval from the chat message history from Cosmos DB. When it gets the relevant documents, find relevant documents from cognitive search, and then creates the context from those relevant documents and so on, right? So you can really follow along with the solution. Some other things, I mean, don't really have time to go in depth on this. This was just kind of like an intro and trying to get people excited, go play around with this, go check out this sample solution. But some other things that we didn't really touch on that are important if you really want to do a real deployment. You also have a playground for Dall-e. So you can say, hey, I want to create an image of something. And then, it'll create it here in the playground for you. But most importantly, so you can have different deployments of the different models. You have the different family of models that are available. You see here, there's a bunch of different GPT 3.5s. There's a couple of different GPT 4s. There is also the ability, maybe it will be interesting to do a session on this. There's the ability to fine tune a model. So that's when you teach a model a new behavior, basically, or a way to answer an interaction. You have to upload a training data set, and then it will run a fine tuning job for you. And that's how you fine tune a model. That's what's called fine tuning a model. So that's available now, right now, in the service as well. You do have, like I said, you have quotas for consumption. So you see here, for example, right, tokens per minute of 3.5 turbo. I have already allocated 63% of my usage limit. So I gotta make sure I don't go over. I've allocated 50% of my usage limit of GPT-4. If you were to need to go higher, you can see here where it says request quota. I assume if you're like a real paying customer, my account is actually a Microsoft sponsored account that we get as MVPs, so they don't give us a huge limit. But if you were a commercial customer and you needed like a higher limit than you get from the default quota, I assume that you can just call, and if they see that you're serious, then they'll just give you more. And then something else that's in preview right now is content filtering. So you see here, you can create a customized content filtering. There's different categories in terms of, like hate content, sexual content, self-harm, violence, things that you can filter out of the model, and try to make them higher or lower, and also be able to um, uh, trap, like, make sure that people are not trying to do harmful things with the models that you have deployed. And you'll be able to customize these as well, right? So if you needed some sort of custom content filter, you will be able to create that on your own too. All right, so that's kind of like just the end of the features. As I said, there's going to be more announcements from Ignite coming out this week. This is going to be, even more augmented with more stuff after this week is done, and after they do all the Ignite announcements, for sure. So I'm just going to do a quick recap. So it's recorded here. I think we touched on all these topics already, and then we'll just jump back into Q&A. So again, Gen AI, very early, fast moving space, fastest moving space so far I've seen in my career in IT. When the cloud, I don't know, a few years ago, that cloud really hit mainstream, and it was like, oh my God, Azure and AWS and Google, they just move so fast. I don't know, this is moving so fast. There's new updates every week. Enterprise needs are unique, as I mentioned before, something very important to understand. And really, that's where the niche comes in for the Azure OpenAI service, is to meet the enterprise needs of using these models. You can wrap the OpenAI functionality around the enterprise, right? You can make sure that only the right people have access to them. You can co-locate it in a specific Azure region that you want. It'll be protected by all the Microsoft physical, security protections, as well as all the legal protections. Very easy. Again, Microsoft has made it very easy to get going with both the graphical AI studio and the code as well that they are providing as samples. You can use all the other Azure services together as well to put a full solution, right? So we saw how you can use cognitive search as your vector database. You can use the document intelligence to process documents and get structured output out of them. You can use Cosmos DB for storing chat histories if you want, and so on, right? And the most important part as well, and again, this definitely plays out this week that Ignite is happening, is that the service is going to continue to evolve to offer the latest models, the latest APIs that OpenAI develops as well. Satya Nadella was at the OpenAI Dev Day. He showed up. He spoke for a few minutes. The partnership is not going anywhere. Microsoft invested, I believe, is something like 10 billion on OpenAI. So yeah, Microsoft is not going anywhere. Like the partnership is going to be there for a while. And I just read in the news maybe like 2 days ago that Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, was actually quoted saying that they're going back requesting more compute from Microsoft to be able to train like the next generation model that's going to come out after GPT-4. So whatever GPT-5 comes out or whenever it might be, they will be working hand in hand with Microsoft because they are running out of the compute power to be able to train such a large model. So very exciting space, and I hope everybody kind of like gets excited with all these tools as well, and just to think about all the different things, new experiences that can be built using some of this stuff, right? So I'm just gonna go back to the chat here, and yeah, let's just check the Q&A here. Sorry. So I'm kind of behind here, obviously, because it's kind of hard to like to do the presenting and moderating at the same time. Can be used only on Azure. We can use on-premise too. Now this is cloud only. Cloud only. You can't download these right now. Super fast. Yeah, inference is very fast in Azure. Like I said, some people, I saw some actual charts saying it was like 3 to 4 times faster than inference running in Open AI for this. You can build on-prem infra. You could build on-prem infra from this, but the only thing to keep in mind is if you build on-prem infra from it, you would not be running on-prem the OpenAI model, right? Because you can't download the GPT model. That is closed source in OpenAI or in Azure. That's your only two options to use the GPT model specifically. If you wanted to do it on-prem, you would have to use one of the open source models like the Llama model from Meta. All right. Show the incident report. So we did that already. Pricing breakdown with minimum usage, free DB and minimal use. I don't really know. I don't really know what's the pricing breakdown. But if you're just gonna use it for playing around, you only pay per tokens, right? So keep that in mind. If you just play around on your own and you just do a few interactions, the tokens are charged at the cents level, right? So if you're not really doing a production, it's not like, back in the day, I don't know if some of you guys remember when Synapse came out, and people were like, oh, how do I start with Synapse? And it's like, well, you deploy a Synapse cluster, and it's like, oh, it starts at like $20 an hour kind of thing. I don't want to spend 20 bucks just to play for 1 hour, and then I have to shut it down and all that kind of stuff, right? It doesn't work like that. So if you deploy the model but you only interact with it a little bit, you're only paying cents per token, right? So I don't know exactly what will be the minimum, but I don't think the barrier of entry is that high. All right. If your org has an actual subscription account, you should be able to add this. Yes, you should be able to add this. You should be able to do that. I follow the components mentioned on GitHub. Looks like several parts can be free. That's true. The V3 app service and Cosmos DB comes out to about $100 a month. Yes. So that is the actual just the chat UI piece. So for the chat UI piece, it might be more, but those are also the components that get shipped with it. That's the default config of the chat. It's not necessarily has to be that expensive, but you would have to tweak the deployment code. It's in Bicep. I haven't tweaked it. I just deployed it as is. But technically, you could switch to, like, say, instead of using the Cosmos DB with 400 RUs, you could use a Cosmos DB serverless, right? And that will save you some money too if you're just playing around with it. The other option, of course, is also to just like deploy it, play with it for a day or whatever, and then nuke it once you're done, right? So just keep that in mind. So yeah, so it says right there at the end. So thank you so much for that, by the way, Asaba. If you did the math, really appreciate it, because that's really cool. Um, uh, Hallucinations that somebody posted the Victara. Actually, that's what it is. Victara is the people that created the hallucination leaderboard. So that's cool. Thank for that. Please show the cost. Okay, well, so Srinivas, check out Sava's breakdown there in the chat because he's did a pretty good job. And yeah, Sava has the link here for the hallucination leaderboard. Amazing. Good job. As a data engineer, how can we utilize Gen AI to do stuff related to data engineering? That's a great question. I mean, there's different things you can do. Some people are starting to look at using Gen AI for SQL generation. There's also now OpenAI has what is known as the code interpreter. So you can feed it different actual files and execute code on it. So you could do, let's say, for example, as a data engineer, somebody just gives you like a CSV file and they're like, here, we want to work with this. And then you got to open it. And then it's a CSV with like a bazillion columns. You're like, oh my God, like, how do I even start to work with this? What are the types of all these different columns? So you could write code yourself to try to automate all this, or you can just give the file to an LLM and say, hey, here's this file. Can you give me back a JSON that has all the different headers, the columns, and then the type based on what you're seeing in the file? And it will just do that without you having to roll your sleeves and start coding something, right? So there's some creative use cases that can you look into it. Yeah, like I see Nest answer right behind. It says it can write code for you. That it can do too, right? You can get it to write SQL. You can get it to write Python. All this stuff. All right, another question from Sava. How much Azure's version of ChatGPT LLMs model differ? Um, Yes, the system prompt, you can change the system prompt yourself, but what is in terms of like the actual constraints of the model, yes, they are constrained the same as ChatGPT's in OpenAI's. I doubt that's something that the OpenAI version considers harmful would not be considered harmful in the Azure version. And if anything, the biggest difference is the stuff that, like I said, I didn't get to cover because this is not focused on it, but probably the new content moderation capabilities are some of the biggest differentiators that we're going to see, right? Because you can tweak some of the stuff. I mean, if we're open to it, you can see there's the ability to say, let's say, violence for whatever use case it might be. You can have it set to like high, medium, so we can tweak a little bit, I guess, maybe get a little bit more variability in the behavior of the LLM. I haven't played around with the content um, filtering, custom content filtering stuff. So I assume you can get a little bit of difference in behavior there, but I wouldn't expect a free for all at all, right? Microsoft still has to try to be kind of like AI safe, let's say, right? Are the model versions compatible? Yeah, they are compatible, the model versions. So the way that OpenAI develops their API, you basically say, oh, I want to interact with this version of the model, and then you send the message. So technically, you could have this like a parameter in your app and then just say, oh, okay, now I want to send this message, but to like Ford Turbo. And something else very important. This is a great question. The OpenAI, um, the Azure OpenAI endpoint consumes the exact same API as the OpenAI endpoint. All right. So they're API compatible between the two of them. So if you develop an app against the OpenAI global endpoint, you can take that app and host it inside Azure and just point the endpoint to the Azure OpenAI deployment and it will work. It's the exact same API. All right, cool. Can I utilize other open source models like Llama? Keep an eye out for Ignite this week. Tokens per transaction, tokens per minute is how it's rated. Um, if you leave off the rack part and no history and no web front end, just call the API. Yes, it's only the tokens. Yes, exactly. I mean that is only the tokens. Obviously, there's a lot of cost in the peripheral piece of the solution. But I really appreciate there's a good breakdown as well. So anyway, thanks everybody for joining. We went over by a couple of minutes, but hopefully it was a good session and hopefully we got all the questions handled. I know this is a really hot space. If you have other ideas, stuff that you might want to see, feel free to put a message on the meetup board, and yeah, we'll try to get more stuff scheduled as well. on the group because I know it is a hot topic these days. And also, I will be uploading the recording on the YouTube channel as well, so everybody will be able to go back to it if you want to. And until next time, thanks for watching. Have a good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. Appreciate you being here. Bye bye.